Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 10th June 2021. These are the articles that we'll be dealing today. The promise and perils of digital justice delivery. This article is about e-courts. Before we get into the details of this article, let me give a brief background about e-courts. Basically, the purpose of this project is to ensure that we reduce the time taken for justice delivery. The e-courts project was actually conceptualized on what was called the National Action Plan. So the National Action Plan for implementation of information and communication technology in Indian judiciary. And this was laid down in 2005 itself. So this was submitted by E-Committee of the Supreme Court way back then, and the program had a vision to transform the Indian judiciary by using ICT and empowering the courts. It's a pan-India project, that is across India. Despite having a mandate to take this very seriously, it is only in the pandemic that the concept of digital justice delivery has seen a larger role in the delivery of our justice. One more thing you have to know about this Pan-India project is it is monitored and funded by Department of Justice under the Ministry of Law and Justice, Government of India. And the entire courts across the districts in the country will be monitored by this department. So what is the project actually trying to do? What is the project's vision? Firstly, it wants to provide efficient and time-bound citizen-centric service delivery. That is, it should be citizen-friendly. The second point is it tries to develop and implement decision support systems in courts. So all sorts of mechanisms and softwares which are required to dispense the cases in a faster manner, they will be automated, they will be transparent, and accessibility of information for all its stakeholders will become even more relevant. So to enhance judicial productivity, this is another term that we can use in our answers. Judicial productivity, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Quality as in we will have faster disposal of justice, and also at the same time we can reduce the number of cases. This article talks about as many as 85,000 cases which were pending over 30 years. So this is the project. Now this article tries to analyze the positives and negatives of this e-courts project. The context in which this again came into news is that the E-Committee of the Supreme Court recently released its draft vision document for phase 3 of this project. So phase 1 and 2, what were they about? Those phases were all about digitization. We have to create the infrastructure, right? Like for example, there should be a e-filing software portal in place. There should be a mechanism to track cases online, and there should be judgments which should be uploaded on the portals. All this were the priority in the first two phases of the project. Now we came up with the third project. So there were certain roadblocks as well. Supreme Court and High Courts have been able to function online in the pandemic because of this e-courts project only. But now we need to ramp up our ability to dispense the cases faster, because under the phase 3 we decided that there should be a commitment to the digitization of court processes, not just the infrastructure. Even the processes should be actually digitized. They should be upgraded to the electronic infrastructure of the judiciary. So what this will ensure is it will create an ecosystem where this online functioning of courts will ensure that the cases are disposed faster. However, it is one of the process which is problematic to the writers of this article. So the quotes envision a seamless exchange of information. Seamless exchange of information. Now one might wonder, without having information, how can the courts actually look into the case merit? This seamless exchange of information is actually between all the stakeholders in the criminal justice system. So this involves police, this involves the prison systems, and basically the objective here is to create what is called as the ICJS, or interoperable criminal justice system. So it is like a centralized database where if you just type in and search for certain information, you will get access to police records, prison records, and of course the judicial records. But here is the problem. Whenever we want to create centralized databases of information, you have to look at it from the perspective of the objective that this database is trying to attain, and set it off with the disadvantages it has. Only when the advantages are much greater than the disadvantages, such a policy option should be picked up. Now, in the case of companies, why are we not using this same logic? Why are we allowing the companies to mine the data onto a centralized database? The question is, the objective of these companies is to target the audience with advertisements. But that is not the case in the case of government. So government has three wings: legislative, executive, and judiciary. So Indian government works on the principle of division of powers. Never there was a concept of centralization. This centralization will actually create what is known as a surveillance state. Now one might wonder, isn't that logic applicable to the companies as well? Yes, that is quite possible. That is the reason why we wanted data protection framework. We have the government to actually protect us from the private companies. Even though if there are certain disadvantages, just because we trust in our governments that they will take action if something goes wrong, we definitely trust our governments to deal the issue effectively through a data law. But what if the government itself is trying to create a surveillance state and our rights are under threat? To the people who have access to that surveillance ecosystem, they might misuse it. Do we have enough laws in check and ensure that such scenarios would not happen? There is no guarantee, right? So this is exactly where we have to try to understand the role of technology, and this is exactly how we have to go forward. It is in this case, Supreme Court in the 2017 landmark judgment of right to privacy in the Puttaswamy versus Union of India case, Supreme Court held that right to privacy should not be violated. Now, unless and until we have this privacy system in place where there is transparency, this interoperable criminal justice system, which tries to create a centralized database, will actually exacerbate the existing class as well as caste inequalities. Even today, in the 21st century, there is a lot of mistrust associated with our government agencies. We don't trust our law enforcement agencies like police, etc., because they believe that there is a probability of getting harassed. Even in the 21st century, despite the government trying its best to inculcate the friendly policing activities after sensitization, there is still a lot of fear amongst the common public. So if we actually ensure that data creation happens at local police stations, there is a history which contributed to the criminalization of entire communities. This author is talking about a law called the Criminal Tribes Act. So instances like this, when you put entire control under one particular institutions without checks and balances, it is historically proven that there will be stereotypes developed and inequalities would increase. So am I saying, or the article writer is saying, that digital justice delivery is completely not necessary or we should avoid it. That is definitely not the objective of the author. So whenever we are talking about governments, we have to keep this concept of checks and balances. Checks and balances is the fulcrum on which the trust in our institutions build. So there is absolutely no necessity that we create a centralized database where we have access to almost every detail of the person. Rather, the power to gather information should be decentralized. It should not be placed under one system. Only upon the request of different institutional heads, we should gain access to information, or rather the judges should gain access to information. So it might be a very slow and boring, tedious process for the outsider, but despite being slow, we can definitely work on integrating systems in a much seamless manner, create mechanisms for faster approvals. But decentralizing as a matter of principle is definitely needed to protect the trust that is necessary. Encouraging accord. This article is in the context of the finance ministers meeting of G7 countries. This G7 countries reached a landmark accord setting a global minimum corporate tax rate. So the agreement could form the basis of a worldwide deal. It will now be discussed in amongst the G20 countries, and there is a financial ministers and central bank governors meeting in the month of July. So probably in that meeting, this can actually become a worldwide deal. So G7 also agreed to move towards making companies declare their environmental impact. So basically environmental impact assessment will be taken up by companies in a more standard way. So investors will decide which green projects they can associate themselves with. Before proceeding further, we have to understand that G7 is actually an intergovernmental organization. And this intergovernmental organization will discuss certain issues of common interest of developed countries, like say for example global economic governance. So this is one of the mandate of the organization, and international security and energy policy are some other interests that this organizations deal with. So all the G7 countries are actually a part of G20 countries. If this is G20, we can take that inner circle to be G7, and it does not have any formal constitution or anything like that, and all the decisions are completely non-binding. Please remember that nobody can force a sovereign government to follow certain directive, because this is something that is based on consensus. So this global minimum corporate tax would actually put in place certain measures to ensure taxes were paid in the countries where businesses operate. So place of effective management, which has been in news for a very long time. This has been a point of contention because effectively the operations are running in one country and the taxes are being appropriated by another country just because they have a lower tax rate. Say for example, take the case of Flipkart. Flipkart bases its operation in Singapore. The only reason is that the corporate tax is very low there when compared to India. But the entire business is in India, and therefore we have levied something called the minimum alternate tax, so that the companies don't escape this taxation. But base erosion and profit sharing is a concept that these G20 countries actually want to embrace, so that the taxes which are being evaded by using the loopholes within the countries, in order to address these loopholes and bring out uniformity in tax structure, BEPS was the project of OECD, which actually had the backing of this G20. So this present global minimum corporate tax rate is yet another measure by G7. We already have this BEPS, and how is it going to be different is one of the question. So we can expect a discussion even on that aspect, how this minimum corporate tax rate and this OECD objective of ensuring that there is no base erosion through this BEPS project, how will they unite is yet to be seen, and that will be clearly understood in this July meeting. So what is India's stance on this? Taxation ultimately is India's prerogative, so nobody can dictate us. But will we actually join this, or we don't join this? This decision should completely be dependent upon the opportunities and threats that we'll be facing. The government is open to participate. It can engage in these discussions that will happen in July, and India is very likely to benefit from this minimum tax rate of 15%. So the basic fact here is that the effective domestic tax rate is above the threshold. That is, in India we'll be taxing somewhere around 26%, and the country would continue to attract investment if this 15% is adopted globally. Moreover, with this measures like tax erosion and everything in place, we can expect that base erosion is a problem that can be handled effectively on a global level. So, considering the benefits that we have despite losing certain revenue, if India with such huge market, we have 140 crore population, and we will be having nearly 45 to 50% of our population in working age. So there will be very cheap labor. It will attract huge investments. So this will definitely be one of the big factors for companies to come to India. One of the reason why a lot of companies hesitate to come to India is because of the higher tax rate. Other countries will have a lower tax rate. That is the reason why Singapore like destinations are preferred by companies. So there should be appropriate coordination between the application of this new tax rate, but it should also address the long-standing issue which was left hitherto unaddressed, that is digital taxes, because we are moving towards a scenario which is considered to be Industrial Revolution 4.0, where digitalization of almost every sector of economy is going to drive the growth of the complete global economy. So any final agreement should address this, and also should have proper conditions and appropriate grievance redressal mechanisms in place, especially to handle with those tax havens which have historically stood in the way of anti-money laundering practices across the world. So that is definitely a good sign and encouraging accord, and therefore, according to the view of the author, we should welcome such a move. That is the gist of this article.